If you stand in the hills of County Wicklow, just south of Dublin, the world feels very old. They call this the Garden of Ireland. It is a landscape of rolling topography, dense Sitka forests, and rain that seems to hang suspended in the air, refusing to fall. It is a place where the timeline of history is visible in the stone walls and the peat bogs. For centuries, life here was defined by the physical limitations of the land. If you wanted to trade, you walked to the market. If you wanted to speak, you visited your neighbor. Distance was the ultimate law. But in 2013, inside a modest pebble-dashed bungalow in the quiet townland of Kilpedder, that law was being broken. There were no armed guards patrolling the perimeter. There were no luxury cars in the driveway to suggest illicit wealth. There was only the hum of a cooling fan and the click of a mechanical keyboard. Inside a darkened bedroom, a young man named Gary Davis was sitting in his pajamas. He was miles away from the nearest city and an ocean away from the jurisdiction of the FBI. But on the screen before him, the geography of the physical world had dissolved. Here, amidst the sheep farms and the silence, Gary Davis was not a quiet, unemployed Irish citizen. He was Libertas, and he was currently clocking in for his shift as the chief administrator of the most sophisticated narcotics empire the world had ever seen. To understand how a man in rural Ireland ends up at the helm of a billion-dollar black market, we first have to understand the architecture that allowed him to exist. The Silk Road was not just a website, it was a statement. Launched in 2011 by the enigmatic dread pirate Roberts, it was designed to be the ultimate realization of libertarian free market theory. It was an Amazon for the underworld. The genius of the Silk Road wasn't the drugs, it was the trust. Before this, buying illegal narcotics was a transaction fraught with physical danger. It required street corners, cash handovers, and the constant threat of violence. The Silk Road digitized this risk. It introduced the banal comforts of modern e-commerce to the drug trade: star ratings, customer reviews, escrow services, and dispute resolution. It operated on the Tor network, the Onion router, a system originally developed by the US Navy to protect intelligence communications, now repurposed to cloak the identity of anyone, anywhere. When you connected to the Silk Road, your signal didn't travel in a straight line. It was bounced through a global network of volunteer relays, encrypted at every step, peeling back layers like an onion, until the origin of the signal was mathematically impossible to trace. Or so they thought. In this digital void, geography became irrelevant. A buyer in Berlin could purchase LSD from a chemist in San Francisco. A hacker in Russia could sell exploits to a fraudster in Brazil. And managing it all, keeping the peace in a digital room full of criminals, was Gary Davis. Gary Davis was not a kingpin in the traditional sense. He didn't have a cartel. He didn't own warehouses of cocaine. He was something far more modern, and perhaps far more unsettling. He was a bureaucrat. Davis suffered from Asperger's syndrome and depression. He found the chaotic, loud, and demanding nature of the physical world difficult to navigate. But in the structured, binary world of the Silk Road, he found clarity. He found a hierarchy where he made sense. Under the pseudonym Libertas, the Latin word for liberty, he rose through the ranks of the site's forum moderators. His job was surprisingly mundane. It was the customer service of crime. When a vendor claimed they shipped a package of heroin that a buyer claimed never arrived, it was Libertas who reviewed the tracking data. It was Libertas who decided who got the Bitcoin held in escrow. He answered support tickets. He banned users who broke the site's rules that ironically prohibited things like child exploitation and stolen credit cards, even while facilitating the sale of Class A drugs. For this work, he was paid a weekly salary of roughly €1,500. It is a strange juxtaposition to consider. Outside his window in Wicklow, the slow, agricultural life of Ireland continued as it had for generations. Farmers tended their livestock. The rain washed the roads. Meanwhile, inside the bungalow, Davis was coldly adjudicating disputes worth tens of thousands of dollars in narcotics. He was a ghost in the machine, a digital arbiter of justice in a lawless kingdom. He believed he was safe. He believed the encryption was absolute. He believed that Libertas and Gary Davis were two separate entities, divided by an impenetrable wall of code. But code is written by humans, and humans make mistakes. While Davis was organizing the forums in Ireland, a task force in New York was meticulously dismantling the walls of the Silk Road. The FBI, the DEA, and Homeland Security had launched a coordinated siege on the site. They weren't trying to hack the encryption directly. That was mathematically infeasible. Instead, they were looking for human error. They were looking for leaks. The breakthrough came when they identified the server location of the Silk Road, hidden in a data center in Iceland. When they imaged that server, they didn't just find the website. They found the logs. They found the private chats of the Dread Pirate Roberts. They found the payroll spreadsheets. And they found the real-world identities linked to the digital masks. In late 2013, the FBI arrested Ross Ulbricht, the founder of the site, in a public library in San Francisco. The king had fallen. Panic swept through the forums. The site was seized. The famous splash page appeared, the FBI shield replacing the green camel logo of the Silk Road. Most users scrambled to delete their hard drives and vanish, but the logs from Iceland were already being analyzed. The agents traced the digital footprint of Libertas. They correlated the times he was online with the IP addresses that had, on rare occasions, slipped through the cracks of the VPNs. They looked at the blockchain analysis of the Bitcoin payments sent to him. The lines on the map began to converge. They crossed the Atlantic. They narrowed down to the Republic of Ireland, then to County Wicklow, then to Kilpedder, and finally, to a specific broadband connection in a specific house. The anonymity was gone. The mathematics had failed to account for the physical reality of a paper trail. January 2014. The depth of winter in Ireland. The raid was not a dramatic Hollywood-style assault with helicopters and flashbangs. It was a procedural, bureaucratic operation, executed with the quiet efficiency of state power. Officers from the Garda National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, acting on information from US federal agents, approached the bungalow. When they entered the room, they found the laptop. This is the crucial moment in cybercrime investigations. If the device is encrypted and powered down, the evidence is often lost forever. But if the device is active, if the keys are in the RAM, the door is open. They secured the machine. They found the keys. They found the login credentials for Libertas. In an instant, the two worlds collided. The quiet, isolated man from Wicklow was forcibly merged with the high-ranking administrator of a global criminal enterprise. Gary Davis was arrested, but his ordeal was only beginning. The United States government wanted him. They filed for extradition. They wanted him to stand trial in New York, the jurisdiction where the FBI had built their case. For the next 4 years, Davis fought a legal battle that captivated the Irish public. His defense was rooted in his humanity. He argued that his Asperger's and severe depression made him extremely vulnerable. He argued that the harsh conditions of the American federal prison system would be tantamount to a death sentence for someone with his mental health profile. It was a clash of values. The rigid, punitive arm of American justice reaching into the compassionate, protective instincts of Irish law. But the evidence was overwhelming. The scale of the Silk Road's operation, hundreds of millions of dollars in drugs, meant that sympathy had its limits. In 2018, the Irish High Court ruled against him. The appeal was rejected. Gary Davis was put on a plane. In a federal courtroom in New York, the pastoral silence of Wicklow seemed like a hallucination. Davis stood before a judge, facing a potential life sentence. The prosecution painted him as a vital cog in a machine that had distributed poison around the world, leading to overdoses and addiction. The defense painted him as a recluse, a man who sought belonging in a digital community because the real world had rejected him. They argued he was a janitor, not a drug lord. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to distribute narcotics. The sentence was handed down, 6.5 years in a federal prison. He was sent to the Federal Correctional Institution in Fort Dix, New Jersey, a low-security facility, but a prison nonetheless. For years, Libertas sat in a cell. The man who had wielded the power to ban users and judge disputes in the digital realm was now stripped of all agency. He was released and returned to Ireland in 2024. The story of the Wicklow Silk Road is not really about drugs. And it is not really about technology. It is about the collapse of distance. For thousands of years, living in a place like Kilpedder meant you were removed from the center of things. It meant you were safe, obscure, and largely irrelevant to the geopolitical forces of the world. But the internet has flattened the earth. It has turned every bedroom into a potential command center, and every quiet village into a node on the global supply chain. Gary Davis believed that he could separate his actions from his location. He believed that he could be a digital avatar by night and a simple country resident by day. He learned, at great cost, that the digital world is not a separate dimension. It is a layer on top of this one, and when that layer is peeled back, there is always a physical human being, sitting in a physical room, waiting for the knock at the door. In the digital age, there is no such thing as the middle of nowhere. We are all just one connection away from the center of the storm. That is it for today's video. Let us know in the comments section what you think of this story, and I will see you on the next video.